experience as opposed to, forgive me, a life-sucking experience, and being able to just continuously take and take. I think we're moving on from that. And I'm hopeful that collectively, remember, companies grow and thrive when employees are healthy. When we can get everybody on board, that process works really well. So after that inquiry meeting, after that discovery conversation, after I've asked those thoughtful wellness conversations and they have developed where both sides are willing to buy in.
Yo, this is Christian D. Evans with Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in and listening to our amazing podcast. This is where we reveal the top 1% of business concepts and systems and processes to scale 8 and 9 figure businesses. We interview top level 8 and 9 figure CEOs, business owners, and amazing TEDx speakers like David Meltzer. We got Nick Cavuto, Pascal Bachman, and so many others. And if you feel like this resonates with you, please share this with your friend, your family, and make sure you impact them as well, because we're trying to spread the message on those that do not know how to scale 8, 9 figure businesses and talking higher level business concepts. So guys, remember, enjoy the episode and be uncommon if you can. Cheers. Thank you so much for tuning in to Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I'm your host, Christian D. Evans. This woman is the CEO of Fit to Order, a woman-owned corporate wellness company based in Maryland, and a work wellness solutions for our sedentary workforce and serves local, regional, and national clients. She's also a yoga instructor, ACE certified group fitness instructor, personal trainer, ACE health coach, 10-time marathoner, triathlete, perpetual student. She has also served on the board of advisor for the nonprofit organization Believe Big, and continues her work as a patient advocate for those on the cancer journey. She has spent the last 30 years in the health and wellness industry, inspiring individuals, families, teams, and organizations to invest in their health by using nutrition, movement, and stress management tools that support a busy lifestyle. And we're going to be diving into an amazing story that she has today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Stacy Fritz. How are you doing, Stacy?
I'm doing great, Christian. Thanks for having me on. I'm very excited to go a little deeper with you today.
Well, hey, I'm really excited as well because, before we jumped on this podcast, one of the reasons why I wanted you on was because I wanted to talk about employee health and what's going on and being active. But with that comes an incredible story that you shared just briefly with me. And I really want to, just for our audience, if you don't mind, just diving into that story and really building that foundation of why this is so important.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Thanks for that beautiful intro. So I could go in a million different directions with this story. So I'm giving you full permission to reel me back in, because one of my most favorite subjects to talk about beyond just employee health in general, is the relationship that I have and had with my only sibling, Brad. I have been in this industry, as you mentioned, for a very long time, and I'm not sure if you have siblings, but as you can probably imagine, a sibling relationship is interesting because you take different paths, and my brother and I were certainly that. We traveled different paths. I was in the health and wellness industry, and he was a commercial airline pilot. Long story short, I found my professional and my personal life really essentially collided, because again, I've been in the health and wellness space for a long time, him not so much, but he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer in 2018, and unfortunately we lost him to this plane of life last year, actually in late 2020. So for me now, my career has taken on an even bigger role in my heart, because I felt passionately about it before, but I for sure will spend the back half of my career really talking about how we do a better job in taking control of our health, because I believe wholeheartedly that my brother should still be here. I know for a fact that his cancer diagnosis was not one of genetic origin. It was one of environmental. And we know that there are many things that we can do to change behaviors, which is something I already talk about in my professional world, that can mitigate the horrible journey that my brother had to travel and ultimately lose his life here. So again, that's a quick version, but he he was and is probably one of my most favorite people in the whole wide world, and continues to live on through his 3 beautiful children. And so I always keep him in my heart when I talk. And I'm thankful that you gave me the opportunity to say his name, because everything I do is in honor of that relationship and trying to help somebody else prevent what me and my family, my children, his children had to go through.
Yeah, and let's dive into that a little bit. So, and if you don't mind sharing, like, what were some things, some lessons that you learned as you saw this
Yeah.
happening, this
Yeah.
devastation in your life?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, my brother was a commercial airline pilot. He loved his job. He worked for Southwest, and so the way I like to describe it, Christian, I do a bit of keynote speaking, and I use the analogy that really resonates with the attendees of the cockpit dashboard. So we know that it's never really the one thing, and I'm talking about most, not every single diagnosis, but I'm talking about in relationship to an environmental cause, things like toxic and pollutants and nutrition and sedentary lifestyle. And we can get into it a little bit later, that sedentary lifestyle as it leads to somebody sitting the majority of the day. So if you think of a cockpit dashboard and all the things that you turn on, the way I like to describe a diagnosis, and it doesn't necessarily have to be cancer either. It can be a chronic health issue, diabetes, heart disease and whatnot. If for every decision you make, there is a switch that's turning on that signals some sort of inflammatory response. Eventually, if we have so many of those switches turned on, that's when bad things happen. So what I like to educate people on is never the one thing that you're eating or the one thing that you're doing or the one thing that you're breathing. It's this culmination of daily habits or daily choices that we make that create an environment in which some sort of chronic health issue can thrive and express itself. So what I like to teach is cooling the body off and turning off those switches. So my brother, in my brother's case, my brother had a sedentary lifestyle. He was working regularly on an airplane close to the sun rays near the fuselage gas. His sleep schedule, circadian rhythm was knocked off. He was traveling in different time zones. And the really uncomfortable conversation is that he was going through a horrible, horrible divorce where his stress was, compounded, day after day, going through that divorce and having the new custody arrangement. His body, was, all of those light switches were turned on and made a cancer diagnosis, an environment in which cancer could thrive. So again, I'm not saying it's the one thing. I'm saying it's many things. So your switches may be different than my brother's, but the goal is to look at holistic well-being and see how can we create an optimal environment for not only the body to heal, but to thrive. And at work, we spend a lot of time at work, right? So we need to be taking a really hard look at our daily choices.
Yeah, what I find so interesting, and like you said, we tend to be very reactive, right,
Yeah.
and not proactive. And there are certain red flags that are blaring, certain alerts that are going through our life. And sometimes it's all of a sudden we wake up and we realize, oh shoot, we have stage 4, stage 3.
Yes.
Now we always can look back, and hindsight is 2020, right? Now my question is like, with your incredible business and organization, right? You're the CEO. What have you been able to give me some examples or some client testimonials or businesses that you've been able to see, okay, hey, not only are you seeing the health for, do better with those employees, but also
Mm,
seeing the results of the business itself, because just the morale, the
yeah.
culture, it's just that healthier lifestyle.
Yeah, so that's a big question, and I want to answer the front part of it. So going back to my cockpit analogy of the switches being turned on, um, everyone, there isn't a single person that I speak to, whether it be in a corporate environment or in a personal, discussion, nobody ever has any time for anything. But I use the analogy, again, back to flight in honor of my brother, that when we have an emergency landing, right? Everybody's got all the time in the world to address it. And I use emergency landing as in a diagnosis or some significant health issue that pops up that you don't have any other choice. So the first part of that is understanding we all need to be making the time and keeping tucked back in the back of our thoughting process of daily habits is that I promise you, you get a diagnosis like my brother's and it's all hands on deck. right? So we have enough time. It's because it's the choices that we make. But the second part is in terms of client testimonials and things that I've seen in the workplace. The evolution of corporate wellness has been fascinating. As I mentioned, or as you mentioned on the front end, I've been in the wellness space for more than 30 years. And that, and again, I like to think of myself as not that old. I have been involved in health and wellness the majority of my life and really made it not only a career, but it's what I am, right? And so for me, the growth and then ultimately getting into the corporate wellness space, 14 years ago, it was fascinating. What I mostly saw was employers applying a biometric assessment. If we had companies that were really working on quote unquote wellness, they would bring a vendor in and they would do some sort of testing, and then they would pull that information for an aggregate report to kind of take a look at, okay, what kind of disease risk management do we need to do here? Do we have a high percentage of cholesterol? Do we have a high percentage of diabetes diagnosis? And really, not always, but often with the folks that I would see, they would do that test and then they put that information in a drawer, and then 12 months later, they would have that same vendor back, and what would happen? Nothing really would change. We didn't do anything. So when I started the business with my business partner 14 years ago, we really made a strong emphasis on, there was this testing, which is really important on the front end, and then there was this retesting on the back end. But who was doing the middle? Who was doing the quote unquote, which we used to hate when brokers would say we were the things and stuff. But that really what it was. We were doing programming, and then in hopes of the back half of that testing to show some sort of change over time. Well, Christian, you know that job often got in the way. It often depends on who opened the door for us. If somebody was really passionate about wellness, we got the nod. And then it was, so, of course, the employee buy-in. And then we had the conversation of, I don't want the employer to know, about my health. And so there was, I still consider corporate wellness a bit of a mess. I do say a mess, but with that mess comes tremendous opportunity. So here's your back half of that question. One company that we work in Baltimore City that's an industrial company, which is unusual because I mostly work with people who sit the majority of the day. But in this case, this company was sedentary to the degree that they were standing most of the day and also applying some really challenging positions for the back and the posture. So they worked on a line. They were actually responsible for building these dredges, which was really fascinating. Long story short, we were brought in and we applied a very gentle strategy. You would consider it yoga. We would consider it corrective exercise. But when the guys would, and it was mostly men, got off the line, and it was mostly older men, when they got off the line, they would spend 15, 20 minutes with us, and we would be facilitating a corrective exercise work break after they got off the job. Long story short, we were with them for quite a few years, and they ended up winning Healthiest Employer. They had a 30% reduction in musculoskeletal issues, which is one of our top chronic conditions in that industry, which was fascinating to us because it was just such a little amount of work and attention to keep the body open and to keep that back really healthy. So that's a really good example of the kind of work that we do because folks do get confused. We are looking to apply daily short work breaks to the workday that don't disrupt workflow, which is our biggest barrier to entry, is that the employer feels that we may be disrupting the workflow. So again, not a workout, really. We call them work breaks, and they're designed to be just that short during the course of somebody's workday that doesn't disrupt. In fact, it actually enhances the work and the production.
Well, that's what I find this so interesting because, see, a lot of business owners always look at dollars and cents, right?
Yeah.
Their budget, the insta balance sheet, and so forth. And the thing is, what I always find so interesting is there's like a lot of proven data to say, okay, when you're living in this state, right, of this anxiety, this stress, you take shallow breaths, and then when you take shallow breaths, like little physiology, your brain is not getting enough oxygen, and so therefore you're not really optimizing your brain capability. And so naturally, what happens, like just like you were saying, is you see actually the whole workforce not working at optimal levels.
True.
And just like you said, by doing this one intentional thing, you can see, and I just want to have our audience just understand, like sometimes, by taking one step forward, you take 10 steps forward, one step back, you take 10 steps forward because of that concept. And just like you said, it's very incremental, but it's also intentional. And then imagine adding just a little bit more. And you've seen that with other larger companies
Yeah.
that may or may not be able to withstand the expense of that on the front end, but
Yeah.
long-term trajectory, obviously you start seeing more optimal just work environment, like you said, culturally, but also just the output of that energy as well, which I find this so interesting. So when you're saying, bear to entry, is
Mm.
that one of the reasons why a lot of companies just may not like prioritize this because they don't see the value? Or
Mm.
what do you think is causing them not to, pursue this route when the data is there?
Remind me that question real quick, but I do want to circle back because you now, like you can see me leaning forward. I just want to comment. First of all, that breath is everything, Christian. That breath is everything. So just simply as it relates to stress, we know that we as a culture are shallow breathers. We breathe in the top third of our lungs. But look at what happens when I do that. My shoulders start to round forward. I start to collapse. And to your point, I'm reinforcing it 100%. Finally, I feel like I'm speaking to my person, right? Because not only are we impeding the ability to function properly, but we're impeding the ability to breathe. And when we know we breathe, we're not invoking the sympathetic response in a way that we are constantly in this high stress, highly charged environment. And in fact, when we learn the breath, which is actually, most people think we breathe properly up and down. The correct breathing is actually east and west. This diaphragmatic breathing, where we're getting full low lung capacity, is actually invoking the parasympathetic response, which is, for your listeners, the relaxation response, which we need far more of. We are living in a state of absolute nonsense in this charge. So moving forward, I think I remember the question, but the fact is that I do think employers, a couple of positive things came out of the COVID crisis. And we know that employers are now paying attention, not only because they have to, but because I feel like we're in an employee, the employee is in the driver's seat, if you will. And so I hate to use the word demand, but I'm proud of the employee population that they're finally raising their hand and saying, I don't feel good in this space, and I need things that are going to, bring into a healthy work lifestyle. So to answer the original question, the employer, I think prior to, they were not necessarily locked in all the way on the value. So it's the VOI, the value on an investment, and we were more heavily tipped in the numbers and the return on investment. And I think the shift is coming, and I'm praying that the shift is coming, that we are moving employee well-being out of the space of benefits and into strategic planning and tied into values, right? Because when there's a shift there, we know that it's top line and top priority. And I get that the numbers are a little slow to lag behind, but when you create a culture of well-being, we know that companies grow and thrive when employees are healthy. Bottom line, they are the most vested stakeholders in your company. If you want that company to grow and thrive, you may want to take a look at removing employee well-being under the same category as pet health insurance. You know that, right? Right now, employee well-being, health and wellness is listed on many benefit plans in the same category as pet insurance. That shows us, right, where the priority, and I love my pets, but come on, right? Did I answer the question, or did I take a
Yes, yes.
backdoor?
No, that's perfect. And I just think it's so funny. I was laughing because it's just so sad where the priority is. And
It
that's one of the
is.
reasons why I want to have this conversation, because again, what I am always thinking about is like, so many times, and you think about quantity of employees, and the reality is, imagine you're able to, you know, decrease that amount and optimize their input, and
Yeah.
obviously increasing that output as well. And so the only way to increase that input is really just saying, hey, how can I get more maximum effort and energy out of them, while giving them that, what you're just basically saying, that foundation. So let's walk this through a little bit as well. So let's say, for example, you work with a company, you work with a client, and like you said, you're trying to find those breaks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And work with their work schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Walk me through that process when you work with a new client, how to integrate that properly. What kind of activities do you do that help facilitate that? I think you were mentioning that a little bit, but is it dependent upon each company? What does that look like?
So let me answer it this way. Let me walk you through how our process would go with a new client. So COVID was, again, this is now on the negative side of the COVID situation. It impacted our business quite substantially because prior to COVID, we were a company that was heavily tipped in on-site employee engagement programs where we would actually send our employees on-site to do a variety of things depending on an internal assessment that we would do. So whether or not it was mindfulness and stress management or nutrition or movement and corrective exercise breaks, or in the HEAL category, which is chronic health issue education. So when COVID hit, as you can imagine, everybody sort of shut down. And so we're actually second tier, Christian, because remember, many of them have still, we know that hybrid and remote work is here to stay, at least to some capacity. So again, same as the conversation as the pet insurance, we're last in line to be brought back in because they were still trying to figure out, many companies were still trying to figure out what this new normal was going to look like. So during that time period, I really spent a lot of time working on my process and in the way of being able to consult and help because I knew and I could see the trends and I was watching the research come out about where we were going in post-pandemic. And so I started investigating and really fine-tuning a process called appreciative inquiry, where it's a must if you're going to work with this company that we at least have a few voices in the room. And what I mean by that, whether or not it's the C-suite, HR manager, and at least some representation of the employee population where we can ask thoughtful wellness questions and bring all voices in the room, because I am quite passionate on that it isn't just solely the employer's responsibility to get this done. In fact, I would argue that it's the marriage between employee and employer conversations. What are you willing to do, and what are they willing to raise their hand for? And we have been given this global opportunity to change the face of health and wellness when it comes to workplace well-being. So this is what I like to say, the 3 Ps are involved after that meeting, is that with the employer is going to allow preparation and permission to whatever it is that we decide upon in that discovery meeting, where we're asking thoughtful questions, bringing all the voices in the room. And then on the other side of it, then the employees are given the opportunity to participate. So the 3 Ps, the permission, the preparation, and then the participation. Because if you think about it, if I pull any one of those out, which seems to be our issue, right? Either your employer is like, it doesn't feel, the culture doesn't feel like it's really permissive to do these work breaks, right? Or they're not going to invest the time, the money, the expertise, and that's going to be a gap. And then you've got this other side over here where the employees have to raise their hand and say yes. And so how do we do that? And it all comes back down to, how do we best customize a culture of well-being that is tied into a company's mission and their values, right? What kind of culture are you seeking? And that brings the end line for the employer, and leaving this legacy that's not just so numbers driven, because whether you like it or not as an employer, they're going to talk about you one way or another when they leave. And the legacy that you can leave behind is that how did they support the culture to give it a life-giving experience, as opposed to, forgive me, a life-sucking experience, and being able to just continuously take and take. I think we're moving on from that, and I'm hopeful that collectively, remember, companies grow and thrive when employees are healthy. When we can get everybody on board, that process works really well. So after that inquiry meeting, after that discovery conversation, after I've asked those thoughtful wellness conversations and they have developed where both sides are willing to buy in, then it's easy. They're choosing from an a la carte menu of things that we have. And if we don't have it, we're vendoring out to folks that we partner with that we believe in.
Wow, I appreciate that. And because, it's a different perspective in regards to, like you were talking about, a little legacy. And, we were talking a little bit about legacy on the front end as well before this podcast. And, if you could just kind of maybe unpack that a little bit, what that
Yeah.
means to you, and what's your driving force. I know with that story and your brother, but I'd love to kind of get your response. And, obviously not only your legacy, but also the legacy that you're empowering other business owners to accomplish.
Yeah. Oh gosh, you asked the really big one for me, and I'm so grateful that you asked it. I'll get through it without showing my emotions on this one as best as I can. I think as an employer, I'm both. Remember, Christian, I am the person, I am the human, I am the sister, I'm the wife, the mother, the daughter. But I am also very, very passionate about what I do for a living. And what I mean by legacy is I'll include myself in this, and you as well, is that whoever works for us has voluntarily raised their hand to take a seat on our airplane, right? And to take that trip with us. And my hope is that instead of emergency landings where we're putting out fires and taking care of problems that we should have larger conversations on prior to getting into the position of having to disease risk management or handle a hefty diagnosis like a stage 4 diagnosis, that we as employers are recognized that there's human behind what we are trying to accomplish as growth and positive, making a positive impact. I think positive impact comes in lots of different ways. I'm in a unique position where I can take a look at this a little deeper. And for me, my brother left a legacy of one that is so beautiful because he and I knew that there was a good chance that he was not going to make it through this diagnosis. So all the while in trying to heal, and hopefully recover and live with this big cancer diagnosis, we were also planning on the other side. So I like to say that I like to help people live healthy, and then I was also prepared to help him die peacefully. As an employer, that's a heavy comment, and I get it. But the reality is we're all headed in that direction, and we need to look at that, even though it's a really tough a really tough conversation, that your legacy is what impact did you make here in the time that you were given? And it could be short and it could be long, but I am going to carry that with me in my business moving forward because I got to experience both. I got to experience helping somebody live, and I think I did that with compassion, and I think I did that with incredible knowledge and expertise, and we tried. But there was a point in time where we said, you know what, this is not going to end the way that we want. And what is the next best thing that we can do? Now, as an employer, that is something that, again, I don't think we talk about. It's the same thing like with mental health issues. It's hard to talk about those things. But legacy to means how can you take that trip through life, get above the flat horizontal story. You worked, you married, you did whatever, you died. What can you do to lift up and live a vertical life and say, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but how can you show up in the best version and with the people that you chose and have chosen you, represent. Don't sit back and just, collect the money. Don't just sit back and, punch the clock. How can you offer them, again, a life-giving situation that when there is a crisis, that you do the right thing too? That's what I'm saying.
I love that because see, that's where you find the true people, right? The true high leverage, leaders, right? They go through crap, but then it's you know what, I want to leave something much more. And that's one of the things that I always love to talk about is, I always think success is, what everybody's always achieving, and true significance is, hey, how many people can I really bring to the top of the mountain, right?
Absolutely.
And that making that impact. And obviously, you have definitely with your company, and you're seeing massive, empowering with these companies and saying, hey, you know what, they're taking initiative, they're taking motivation. And like you said as well, we're starting to see a huge trajectory more toward, employees taking the leadership on this and saying, hey, CEO, hey, owners, we want this. Hey, board of directors, we want this. Kind of walk me through that as well a little bit. What are you seeing in the industry right now? And I'm not just talking about on the business side, like, why aren't business owners kind of taking a hold of it? But obviously more of like pivoting more like, how this impacts the healthcare system. All of a sudden you have healthier, employees, how your employees are more like they're earning for this, and they want this in the culture. They want this in the DNA of the company. So if you could just talk on that a little bit.
So there are some big trends that are happening right now that I'd like to give you just a couple of them. So first and foremost, I think what the industry is calling for is mental health training, right? This is a really big one right now. I'm sure you've seen it on your side too, but mental health in general, I'm so happy to hear that the conversation there's a light being shined on it. I don't know whether or not there's a tremendous shift in numbers. I would say yes, based on COVID and, things that have happened in the economy and, politics and all of those things. But bigger than that, I think that you're hearing voices, which is great, which we're starting to, recognize. So one trend that I'm seeing is leadership mental health training is critical because, again, when you can't see something, and that's not your area of expertise, I think it's pretty easy. Not that somebody would ever, the people that I work with, I am so, I hope that I attract the kind of people that, that resonate with me. And it seems like they do, is that the leaders that I work with, they truly, truly care. But sometimes you don't understand why you care. And mental health is one of those things. You break your arm, you can see the cast, you can't lift something. They know that employee, is going to be out for a bit, right? But with mental health, like you can't see it. So leadership mental health training is a huge one I think you're going to see. The second one I think is really instrumental for my business is you're going to see tools and strategies to address both the hybrid, the remote, and then also the in-house folks. And what I mean by tools is not just necessarily the stand-up desk or things like that. I think you're going to see tools that address not just ergonomics, and then, for example, like eye health, like with the blue eye filter glasses, things that are protecting the body from all of this. The body was meant to move. The body was absolutely meant to move forward, side to side, back. So it doesn't matter if you're standing at a desk all day long or you're seated at a desk all day long. You're still sedentary, right? So I think you're going to see a big push in ergonomics and tools of that nature to be able to support employees. We took them out of the office and we put them at home, which you think is a really great thing, but they may have been set up ergonomically efficient at the office, but they sure as heck are not set up at home very well. So that's a big one. I think you're going to also see that that employers are going to push. They're going to push for employee self-care. I think they have to. I think you're going to see a lot of championing around that. I think for my industry, we're seeing this incredible increase in business because I do think that they're paying attention. And we know that when people are taking care of themselves, they're better able to take care of their job responsibilities. My last trend that I think that you're going to see a lot of was the one that I was making a joke about before about employee health being on the same line item as pet insurance. I think you're going to see, and I'm hopeful you're going to see, the shift to cultures of well-being instead of a la carte employee wellness program. So one off the shelf, you know what I mean? We're going to just do this webinar once a month. We're going to do this class twice a year because we know that's not enough to move the needle, right? So I think you're going to see a shift in the culture, and that could look like the internal design of the on-site. It could look at like the design of the remote workspace. I just think you're going to see a laser focus on better caretaking of the employee in general.
Well, that's actually really exciting to hear. And you did mention something which I want to bring back up. See, what you're saying is that, because I was just going to ask you this regarding, like, obviously everybody pivoted more toward the online space because of COVID and whatever. Now we're post-COVID. Are you seeing that? Before we dive into that question, though, I want to just reiterate that's really good news, and it's really cool to see those trends happening and that trajectory happening as well. And like you said, I don't know if that was more just employee based, where they're like, obviously it's more of culture now, and people are aware of this, and like, hey, we want this, and there's that desire, and now the priority has gone up. But I would like to kind of just loop around and say, okay, why do you think that is? Why do you think that by working remote hasn't really helped facilitate that? You need more of intentionality with kind of what you're explaining.
So, just a clarifying question: are you asking me why do I think that remote working needs that help? Is that what the question is?
Yeah, correct. Why don't you think it was not as effective in regards to, like, just the health and like, and I think you mentioned something, they didn't have the infrastructure in place when they pivoted, but I would like to kind of talk a little bit about that because I found that very interesting with what you just said.
Well, so it's a bit of a, it's funny because I actually use it as a positive in my work environment, but this technology thing has kicked up so big, right, Christian, that we're actually going a little bit backwards in the process of trying to go forward. So for me, the culture really speaks on time that we're doing what you and I are doing right now, which is eyeballs on a screen and, really kind of dialed into the technology. That's hard because if you're remote, how do you make that connector piece? So I think that we need to polish the how do we get after a culture that needs to be technology heavy, but is also protective of that technology heavy. So including those work breaks and finding tools that are not just based on the Zoom, or subscription-based fitness apps. And our market is saturated. We don't have a how-to problem in our culture. You Google anything, how to do a work break, how to protect. It's not a how-to problem ever. It's the same thing with like weight loss and when I speak with folks on nutrition. We don't have a how-to problem. And yet we still have this major issue. What we have is an identity issue. And the second that I think that we pull back and go back to that, as I was trying to explain, this appreciative inquiry model where we are asking thoughtful questions like, where did you feel your best? How do you work your best? How, whether it's short chunks of time, this productivity hack, I think it is different and customizable for all of us. But having a conversation where we are accepting that what works for you may not work for me, and then lots of different choices to be able to pull those tools in, especially if we are remote working, that allows us to connect with live people but doesn't hold us hostage to the computer screen, that we are able to, and I don't know if it's appropriate to share, but like, for example, you are in a space right now where I would consider so much healthier than the space that I'm in right now. I am underneath, even though I have them turned off, I'm underneath LED lights. I'm in an office space. I do have some few windows, but you've opted to take when I say a pause, you're working, but you're working in a healthy environment where you're drawing from nature and fresh air and being able to breathe bigger. So I hope that is really clear, is that it sounds vague, but it's not intended to be vague. It's being able to pull those healthy habits that are designed to push the body in a way that is supportive and not of depleting. And I think that if you've got to be on a Zoom call, taking it outside is one great hack to kind of level up the health during the workday. Remember, if you are somebody who's working, and you and I probably work far more than we care to admit, if you're not trying to figure out ways, how about this research? A 1 hour daily purposeful workout is not enough to undo the damaging effects of occupational sitting. And that research is very compelling. So for those of us who are fit, I have a very healthy workout routine. I still teach, I still run, I still do yoga, I still do Pilates, very engaged, but I have to actively set an alarm on my computer to do a hack every 90 minutes to get up and move and remind myself, because I do love what I do, but I just can't sit there and do it all day long. So doing things like what you're doing would be an example of a little hack that somebody could add into their workday. Why would an employer care if you were rocking the house on your meeting and you can hear a bird or two? That's lovely, right? So I just think it's about getting creative and understanding what your body needs, and knowing that there's a few of us out there that have a little bit more expertise on what the body is calling for, and tapping into that.
So what I love about your approach is it's so strategic. And like you said, it's optimizing the little bit of time that many of us may have, whatever. And you want to make sure that we're just, like you said, I love that approach. Every 90 minutes being very strategic, very intentional, and saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to wake up, do this, boom, and do some sort of activity. And like you said, it's not taking a full, 40 minutes, 100, whatever. Also, I think that was a really, really striking statistic in what you just mentioned.
Yep.
1 hour is not compared at all. And that needs to be obviously mentioned, because honestly, that was a misinterpretation or misunderstanding of what you just mentioned. I thought, oh, that's very, very interesting to hear.
Can I give you one more? Can I give you one more example that I think you asked for? So, for example, tomorrow we're working with a financial company. It's a global financial company, and they are putting in place a 2-a-day work break gift, I'll call it that, for their employees. So what will happen, Christian, is tomorrow at 10 o'clock, one of the employees will go live, and it'll be a 10-minute corrective exercise work break. I already know what it is because I approved it. It's the 6 movements of the spine where we'll get the employees up before their strategy meeting on Tuesday. They have a long-standing strategy meeting. So before they get into that, the CEO will say, before we go there, we're just going to make sure our backs are really happy because we're going to be sitting for the next 45 minutes. My fit coach will lead them through the 6 movements of the spine right there live. It'll be like a Zoom call, many of them calling in from all over the place. And then the fit coach will pop off. They will do their thing. They will also be invited in the afternoon via chat in the link to click on at 2 o'clock to do a mindfulness break, just to take an eye and productivity break from the screen, knowing that they are folks in the financial industry that are sitting there 10 hours a day. And a different fit coach will lead them through a 5-minute standing meditation where if they're invited to take off their shoes, nothing else, they just stand next to their desk. If they want to keep their eyes open, they're looking at a beautiful field of lavender, right? And then they're listening to this amazing voice that just says, take full breath in. Let me teach you the diaphragmatic breath. Let me teach you how to breathe east and west. Those 2 work breaks will be recorded, and they will be put in a private library for that company to tap into. They're going to test drive that for a month, and I promise you, they'll be back. And then the employees will be able to utilize those 2 work breaks, only those 2 work breaks during the course of that 5-day week, and an invitation to do so. Just do an appreciative question that just says, just give me a go for 5 days. All I'm asking you for is for 15 minutes, and come back to me at the end of the week and let me know how you're feeling just about that little teeny tiny hack. And then the next month we'll introduce something different. So again, we've been with this financial company a good long time. We do have a really good trust factor there. But once you tell people that it's in nuggets, bite-sized pieces, where we are not pulling them away, we're not asking them to go put on yoga pants, we're not asking them to roll out a mat, we're not even asking them to, they can even keep their heels on if they're females, if that's what they need to stay seated. They're just invitations. And if you talk to most people, I have yet to meet somebody that says, you know what? I feel amazing 24/7. I could use nothing. I am fine. I've got my food figured out. I'm clean eating. I've never had a headache. There's always somebody that needs to go someplace. So the hope is that we continue to cast the net, and pull them in, and maybe, the ones that are naysayers are listening to the employees like, you cannot believe this chick's voice. I mean, she sounds so chill and zen. I just had a little mindful break. That was it. Right? So nobody's sweating. Nobody's doing anything to them, whether or not we're on site or, online. It's just an invitation to be curious, as my friend Ted Lasso would say, don't be judgmental, be curious, which is my favorite line this year.
I love this because it's there's so many misconceptions, and you were saying like numerous things that a lot of business owners have, like, oh, it's going to take too much time. They got to get a yoga mat. They got to do all this stuff. And the reality is like, no, they literally are just right here. They get up, boom. And then obviously now they're optimized. And that's why I wanted to have you on, because I think there's just a lot of times business owners always think of misconceptions. They don't see the value in it. And like you said, there's a value add to it. Stacy, I just love what you got going on. I appreciate the conversation and just the in-depthness as well. And just your story and what was your passion? What was your legacy that you're pursuing? Stacy, how can our audience reach out to you, be part of your community, and just listen to more of what you got going on?
Oh, thank you, Christian. It was a real pleasure. I really, really enjoyed our time together. You can reach out at, you can find us at www.fittoorder.com. That's FIT, the number 2, order, ORDER.com. And I'm always accessible by email, stacykf@fittoorder.com. I really appreciate you.
And guys, those links will be in the description below. And make sure you guys stop. And for those business owners that maybe have a team of 50 people, or maybe have a team of 10, or maybe you have a team of 100, whatever it is, the reality is that you need to optimize your team, and, you need to prioritize it. That's why I had Stacy on here today, having that conversation, and really, those misconceptions that we have, and saying, okay, you know what, I need to give this to my team and give them value to this, because culturally, that's what you want to leave your legacy as. And again, Stacy, just appreciate the immense value. Those links will be in the description below. Stacy, before we let you go, is there any last words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Well, first of all, just remember that it is those short daily habits that mostly impact our health, which is incredible news because we can control the outcome, which I think people don't realize. Those daily choices add up. And then secondly, I know that you have such a beautiful listener group, is that I am continuing my pivot to reach larger audiences, so that if you have listeners that own large size businesses and offer opportunities to come in and keynote, that my latest keynote is building healthy teams that save money and, more importantly, lives, called Flipping the Switch. And it's a story about my brother and just a little bit of those nuggets that I shared with you today, that I am taking that keynote on the road, and I would love to speak more on that because like I said, I light up when I talk about him, and it works really, really nicely to coach people and teach people about the power of their daily choices. And so if I can take him with me for the rest of my life, that's the goal.
Awesome. And my friends, my audience, that is Stacy Fritz. That is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. Until next time, remember, be uncommon if you can. Yo, this is Christian D. Evans, Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. We thank you so much for listening to this amazing episode. If you feel and you know that this was valuable to you, please show some love to our amazing guest by liking this, by commenting on this, by making sure that you do a nice 5-star review, and just show some love to our guest. That'd be really awesome. Also, make sure you share this with a friend, a family, a colleague, someone that you believe would bring value to their life right now. And guys, we just want to say thank you again for just being part of our community. If you want to have more resources, don't be afraid. Go to christiandeevans.com. You can actually schedule a phone call with me, or you can send me an email at christian.evans@beUncommonIfYouCan.com. That's christian.evans@beUncommonIfYouCan.com. Always love to hear some feedback, and let me know what is the number 1 or 2 things that you are struggling in your business and your life, and we'll make sure we have those conversations. Guys, that is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast, and until next time, remember, be uncommon if you can. Cheers.